Hello, I'm Marguerite Picard, a director at MELCA, and with me today is Ian Sherlock. Welcome, Ian.
Hi.
Ian is a financial planner. He's the principal at Pace Wealth. And today we're going to be talking about what financial planners do for couples and families generally, but more particularly what the role is that a financial planner can play to help families when separation and divorce is happening. So I guess a good place to start, Ian, is what do you do as a financial planner? There are a lot of myths around, but it would be great to hear from you about how you see your day-to-day role.
Okay, well, one of the biggest myths is that we find a silver bullet that enables people to have a great, wealthy future. But the reality, and that's what I thought when I first started, but the reality is a bit further into the person. It's about finding out what really makes someone tick and what people truly need. And that can take a fair bit of digging, a bit more than just a brief questionnaire. Understanding what the person who is in front of me really needs.
Right.
And then finding a financial solution that matches most likely what they need at a priority level.
Okay, that's really interesting because it sounds like your work is as much or maybe more in the beginning about people than it is about money. Maybe that comes as a surprise.
It is, actually. There are a variety of different personality types and different people, and they've also got a vastly broad range of financial positions. And the interesting part, though, is that financial planning is supposed to be about all the money, but in reality it's about people, and the most common objective is simply happiness. And keeping that in mind when you encase it all in the big strategy and the planning and the guidance that we give is critical to the outcome for the client, long-term and short-term.
Oh, thanks. That's a really interesting perspective that probably we don't hear very much.
Well, no, not surprising. It's actually, there's a lot of advertising and finance and advertising, I believe, are bad bedfellows.
Yeah. And I guess one of the things that lots of us might hear said quite frequently, and I certainly do as a lawyer who helps people in divorce and separation, is that I don't need a financial planner, I don't have any money, or I don't have much money. And I guess that's one of the myths that's out there, that financial planners are only there to help people who've got a lot of wealth.
Well, look, that is a key area where they're employed most commonly. So that is the myth. The reality that the average advantage that a financial planner offered the average Australian last year was only about $4,000 was the actual benefit. Of course, there's other people at the top end of the scale where the advantages are massive. But when we look at that, we can scale it and say a financial planner is applicable in a huge range of life circumstances. And that sometimes it's just avoiding some mistakes, some basic rules, and that's more like the guidance and the relationship side.
Yeah.
But look, financial advice is a win for almost every level in the financial scale.
Yeah. And I imagine it provides people with a lot of reassurance and potentially reducing conflict between spouses if they're on the same page and hearing the same advice.
Yes, exactly right. Now, having a single source of facts that can be drawn on and tested is a really good thing. We often find that there's a different set of levels of confidence within relationships. That can lead to some unbalanced seesaws, if you like.
Yes.
And that's not good for anyone.
No.
On the whole, people, again, back to wanting happiness, most of the time, the vast majority of people want fairness as well. But that's the difficulty with fairness, is that comes with a very high level of differences when it comes to grading.
It's a very subjective assessment, isn't it, what's fair?
Yes, because someone will believe something's weighted well in their side is fair, when in actual fact, if everyone had all the information and were able to understand it properly, then that view might change.
So these discussions about fairness lead me to thinking about the work that you do with people who are separating and divorcing. And I know that in the last couple of years you've started working on collaborative teams as the neutral financial planner assisting people. I suppose that's quite different from the work that you might have done beforehand, where you would have been working with a couple who were looking towards building and maintaining wealth as a joint project. Whereas in divorce, what you're helping people to do, I guess, is make sense of what's going to happen in the future.
Absolutely. Look, in my bank years, you often saw people in the building phase and the accumulation phase of their lives. There was the other sector where we managed people who were heading off into retirement. They needed a balanced, illustration of where that path would take them. But interestingly, I think I was always eventually going to be led to as we say, the collaborative environment. It's very gratifying for me to see that we can make a really big difference, especially for somebody who might not be in the best position to understand exactly what their choices are. In the bank, when we did see people who were going down the separation path, often we saw the trauma of the initial moment, but then only were engaging on one side. And we lost vision on the other side. And sometimes what I was finding was that I was very uncomfortable with the imbalance of what I was seeing panning out.
That's a really interesting thing to hear. So thinking about what you can do as a neutral in separation and divorce sounds like it's very much in integrity with your own values.
Oh, it has to be.
Yeah.
Otherwise you won't get it, I think.
Yeah.
I think I know some financial planners who wouldn't be appropriate in a collaborative setting. They're very adversarial, and I suppose you might know lawyers of the same ilk.
Yes, I think we can safely say that.
Yeah.
So Ian, if somebody is watching this who is going through separation and divorce, it may be that the idea of having a financial planner working with them is never suggested. I guess many years ago, the only time when the majority of lawyers would have heard about when a financial planner might come into the picture is at the end of a settlement.
Yep.
But we're talking about the difference that can be made for people when the financial planner is integrated into the discussions and the building of the project about what separation financial situations are going to look like.
Yep.
So if you had a message for people in that situation, what would it be about how you can help them?
Right, the advantage of involving a financial a planner or an expert with the money, so to speak, is that it can balance up what the truth is of the information and their facts that they are have in front of them. It gives them control and true choices about where they're going next. That is really important when it comes to hashing out the details of what's going to happen with the family's wealth.
So when you talk about truth, I would observe as a lawyer who works in this area that often people have perceptions and assumptions. And one of the things I love that the financial planners do is talk about money personality.
Yes.
And I guess there's a lot of fear behind that creates mistrust.
Yep.
And what seems like dishonesty or behaviour or facts that aren't to be trusted is often transformed when there's a neutral person who's balancing that out, as you say.
Yes, exactly. Now, there's different personalities in money, and often we see different ones within a relationship. The most classic would be one person who's more of an avoidant character.
Yeah.
And that means that they pretty much bury their head in the sand.
Right.
Don't want any involvement in the numbers. But often that is a result of having someone who's a financial vigilant. So Dr. Brad Klontz, he's all over the ABC. He's written some fantastic books. The first of which is called Your Mental Wealth, which is exactly a tie-in to what this is all about. It's about the person, and the mental health is a huge one when it comes to the confidence of handling money. So when there's the disparity in characters involved in managing the money, often the person who's left without as much engagement traditionally has low confidence, is often guilty if there's a large sum of money on the table. They feel as though it's potentially, they don't deserve it.
That's interesting.
It is, but that also leads to some terrible imbalance in some of the decisions and the negotiation.
Yeah.
But when we clear away the mist and we lift the veil on these issues, what we're allowing here is a more fair approach for the entire family that leads the highest chance of happiness in the longer term. And I think that's really the goal for me.
Yeah,
it's very gratifying.
Yeah, I can imagine that it is. And working as a member of a team in collaboration as you do, I'm just wondering, how does that feel for you as opposed to working in your office every day as a sole practitioner? What's the difference in the value for you and for clients?
Well, what I love about the team environment is that we've got a wide selection of resources to draw on that is part of the bigger jigsaw that we're putting together for the client. Sometimes areas overlap. So psychology and finance, independently, they can seem to make sense. But when you put them together, there's definitely overlapping areas. And if that team is together in front of the clients, then it only gives the clients better perception of what they're dealing with and more resources to draw on at the time to arrive at great decisions and happier decisions in the long term.
So it sounds like if you were imagining yourself as a client, you would feel much more supported.
Oh, absolutely. It is all about that. And the grey areas, the unknown areas, and the elephants in the room, they aren't there so much. They're brought out and things are discussed because we've got the people and the expertise to draw on right there in the room, which is a unique environment. Yeah. Often these professionals we're dealing with in isolated silos. Yes. But in this group environment, the sharing of information really speeds up the process. And often I see a sense of relief. You can see that when it occurs. Yes. And it's very gratifying as a professional to be involved in delivering that outcome for a family.
Yeah, I agree with that. Just taking you back to speaking about different money personalities and the avoidant person who's put their head in the sand, maybe because the other person was vigilant.
Yep.
I think my observation about that as a lawyer would be that without the insight of a financial planner or a psychologist, that can very much look like issues about control. There may be control, but it may not necessarily be that. Yeah. And when it comes to separation, the person who's had their head in the sand, and I say that without any disrespect, but the one whose role has not been around the money, then I think can hear people saying to them, you shouldn't trust that other person because what you know or what you don't know about the money means that there are many questions. And I'm interested in your observation about how some assumptions that people come into separation with can be altered when there's a neutral person like you who's got the mutual interests of both people in the separation at heart.
Yes. Now, the biggest fear in a separation, I suppose, is that the conflict and the adversarial nature of the process.
Yeah.
But it's interesting when we really peel it back to the people involved. Rarely we're looking at someone who is trying to undermine and get the worst out of another person. We're generally a product of our education and experience, and the person who's the avoidant is exactly that too, as is the vigilant person who's really been trying to carry it all and make it all work out together. But then that can get, that the feeling can grow over time that can be a controlling or a dominating personality, and there's an element of fear of dealing with that. But when through guidance and education that we give this information, we strip it back to the facts and we go back into these needs and the reality of what's on the table, we find that we can balance these things up. And often we find that the person who's the avoidant gets a greater uplift of control in their lives, and that itself ends up being a big relief.
Yes,
and back
I've
into
certainly
the happiness.
observed that over time, that people who haven't been involved with the money, in the same way that in marriages, roles are played out differently. People make choices by default or otherwise. So one parent might have been more involved with the children, one parent might have been more involved with money and business, for example. And very often I have definitely seen that sense of relief. Sometimes there's fear about, is there enough? What is there? How am I going to manage it? But I've often had people say to me, well, whatever there is, the fact that I've become acquainted with that and I've developed some skills and understanding and control has been really valuable. So I agree with your observation about that. One of the other things that people sometimes bring in separation and divorce is a sense of disappointment or shame about how their money situation is. Often it's a really unfortunate window in time whilst wealth is building, but otherwise people feel a great sense of regret and shame about decisions. And I'm just wondering what the power of the financial neutral can be.
Well, it's all about education, that piece. We find that we've had people with $20 and $30 million pools worried that, can I get a cleaner?
Right.
And
Okay.
it can be so basic.
Yes.
But really, I think the problem goes right back to the fact that people don't talk amongst their friends with complete transparency and honesty. So they don't gauge where they stand in the community, in society. Having a fair feel for that really helps people put it into perspective. And again, gives them right back into that ability to make better decisions and have more control.
So you're thinking if people think that they have done well or have not done well, measuring themselves against society, that might have an effect on how they feel about how well or badly they're placed to make decisions in separation.
Yes. Now look, we probably know people within our families who've actually done very well, but only if they realised that they could be released to enjoy themselves a bit more, and maybe even take a bit more risk.
Yeah.
And taking the right amount of risk, that's a balanced decision. Again, we need good guidance to make sure that those decisions are arrived at in an appropriate way. The worst thing I think I see is a wasted opportunity for hard-earned money to work well.
Yeah.
And sometimes we get too worried about security and we pull that right back in, and those people would be described as the money monks, people who are almost guilty about having it or so paranoid about it that they lose sight of what capital, what money is supposed to do for us.
Yeah. So some of what you're talking about is a bit of reality testing. That's around the money personality, but also presumably about the future of money. And I certainly see that in separation and divorce. And the other thing that I see and I find really helpful with the role of the financial planner is you can make some forward projections on what things look like. So it's tempting very often when people have a settlement, and certainly I would say this is what happens in the adversarial legal system, not in collaboration, where a person wins or loses according to the percentage value of the asset pool that they end up with.
Yep.
But it doesn't necessarily translate to reality for them about, should I be anxious about my future or am I going to be okay?
Yep.
What decisions do I make now that are going to have an impact in 5 years' time? And what's the difference between the quality of the assets that we each take by comparing now with the future? So it's those things that I think really add enormous value for a lawyer guiding their client through the advocacy to make sure that their own best interests are considered as well as the best interests of the whole family.
Yes. So one of the most common tools we use is scenario testing. So we have, oh my goodness, I'm going to only have this much, and it's all I have.
Yes.
But then, did you realise when we project that out over the years and years ahead, that actually your lifestyle that we've run a budget for and that you're quite happy with, we're well within the comfort level of meeting that.
So that's the information and education, and we haven't really spoken about the fact that part of what you do in a collaborative exercise, and I guess elsewhere, is working with families about budget, including children's expenses, which can cause a lot of conflict and are a really important part of discussion in separation and divorce.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I've been rapt to find that that's one of the most common areas of pulling the I suppose the effort together. Is to rally around the best interests of the children is such a strong common ground. If you start with that in many ways and build out from it, the solution almost presents itself to the clients. Build on top of that some as I say, an educational uplift is a tide that lifts all boats. If we add to that, then the solution is something that is almost a practical outcome that they would have expected had they only known this information at the start.
Yeah, so it's based on information. And I think sometimes people think budgets are not a good word because it's seen as being about limiting possibilities, but you're explaining to us that it's quite the opposite. So Ian, we're running short of time, sadly. This has been a really interesting conversation. And I thank you, and perhaps we might come back and extend this another time.
Okay, that'd be a pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you, Marguerite.
Thank you.